Why did Sheriff Wesley Marsh turn to leave the woman he loved just hours after she finally took his hand? I'm leaving tomorrow. The porch lantern hissed in the Wyoming wind. Mabel's fingers tightened around Wesley's rough hand. Braveheart shifted inside the barn. Then she whispered, "Then you should know I love you." Before Wesley could answer, hoofbeats thundered toward the gate. What would you have done? Tell me below. Wyoming Territory, 1886. Sheriff Wesley Marsh had spent most of his adult life following tracks other men had left behind. A missing ranch hand, stolen cattle, a drifter wanted 2 counties east, a frightened family who had taken the wrong trail before snow came down. There was usually a road to follow, and somebody waiting at the end of it. Wesley had never thought much about who waited for him. That afternoon, high in the Wyoming country, there was only Braveheart beneath him. Dark timber along the slopes, and rain coming hard enough to erase the trail almost as quickly as the horse made it. Wesley pulled his coat tighter. Easy, boy. Braveheart flicked an ear. The gelding had carried him through 6 years of patrols, river crossings, spring mud, and winters cold enough to freeze a man's beard to his collar. Wesley trusted the horse more than he trusted most people. That was why the fall frightened him. They were rounding a narrow bend when the earth moved. Not much. Half a foot of mud sliding over stone. But Braveheart's hind hoof came down where solid ground had been a heartbeat earlier. The horse lurched. Wesley grabbed the saddle horn. Braveheart fought for purchase, struck wet rock, and went down hard on one side. Braveheart! Wesley kicked free before the horse rolled. For one terrible second, there was only rain, mud, and the animal struggling to rise. Then Braveheart got his feet beneath him. Wesley was already there. Easy, easy. He ran both hands down the horse's legs. No blood, no bone where bone should not be. But when he reached the left hind leg, Braveheart flinched. Wesley's jaw tightened. He took the reins and started downhill on foot. By late afternoon, water had worked through his hat, collar, shirt, and boots. Braveheart's limp had worsened. Then Wesley saw smoke. Far below, tucked into a fold between 2 dark hills, stood a small ranch. One house, a barn, split rail fencing, a lantern already glowing against the gray afternoon. Wesley led Braveheart toward it. He had barely reached the yard when the front door opened. A woman came down the steps in a brown work dress with her sleeves turned back. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark skin, steady eyes, and none of the hesitation Wesley usually saw when strangers noticed the silver star on his vest. In fact, she barely looked at it. She looked at Braveheart. He stepped wrong. Wesley stopped. I was coming around the upper bend when... Slow him down. He's already been walking slow. Not slow enough. Wesley stared at her. She stepped closer to Braveheart, keeping one hand where the horse could see it. If you hurry him because you're worried, he'll tense against the pain. Then you'll have 2 problems instead of 1. Wesley was not accustomed to being given orders by strangers. Braveheart lowered his head toward her hand. That was irritating. Barn, she said. Wesley followed. Inside, rain hammered the roof while she examined the swollen leg. Her fingers moved carefully, never pressing twice where the horse had already shown pain. A second woman entered carrying a kerosene lantern. She was older, gray beginning at her temples, but she stood straight and looked Wesley over with such calm thoroughness that he nearly felt he was the one being examined. My mother, Ruth Thorne, the younger woman said. I'm Mabel. Wesley Marsh. Ruth glanced at his star. We gathered that much. Mabel almost smiled. Almost. Wesley noticed. Mabel finished examining Braveheart and stood. He'll live. Wesley released a breath he had not meant to hold. But you won't ride him. For how long? 3 weeks, if you're fortunate. 3 weeks? Mabel's eyebrow lifted. You can argue with me or ask the horse. I expect you'll get the same answer. Ruth turned her face away, hiding a smile. Wesley looked through the barn doors toward the mountains. "I'll walk to town tomorrow." "No, you won't," Ruth said. He turned. "Cutter's Creek took the bridge this morning. A freight driver came through before you. Said half the crossing is sitting downstream. I can find another ford." "In this rain?" Ruth held the lantern higher. "You're welcome to drown yourself after breakfast, Sheriff. Seems wasteful to do it before." Mabel finally laughed. It was small and quickly contained, but Wesley heard it. That evening he ate stew at the Thorn table, and was shown a narrow spare room with a washstand, an iron bed, and a quilt folded neatly across the foot. Mabel remained at the doorway. "You stay until the creek is passed, and Braveheart can carry you." "Fair enough. And not one day longer because you've decided my horse treatment needs supervising." "Your horse treatment?" "He's my patient now." Wesley looked toward the barn. "He's my horse. For the next 3 weeks. Those are separate matters." She walked away before he could answer. By the following morning, Wesley discovered that his badge held remarkably little authority at Thorn Ranch. He stood beside the stall while Mabel removed Braveheart's wrap and spread fresh poultice along the swelling. After several minutes, she looked up. "You're hovering." "I'm observing." "You hover like a man who thinks a badge makes him an expert on horses." From the porch outside came Ruth's voice. "It doesn't make him a veterinarian either." This time Mabel laughed before she could stop herself. Wesley looked down at Braveheart. The horse appeared entirely unsympathetic. Over the next 2 days, Wesley found ways to make himself useful. He reset a fence post loosened by the storm, split a stack of pine for Ruth, and climbed onto the barn roof to replace 2 shingles that had disappeared in the wind. And he watched Mabel, not because he distrusted her anymore, at least not entirely. He watched how she checked Braveheart's heat and swelling before touching the poultice, how she kept written notes beside a shelf of glass jars, how she measured things instead of guessing. One afternoon, while Mabel was at the well, Wesley noticed several worn medical books beside the kitchen wall. One lay open. The margins were crowded with handwritten observations. Mabel came inside carrying a bucket. Wesley stepped away from the book. "I wasn't trying to pry." "You were." He waited. She set the bucket down, but carefully. There was no anger in her voice. Wesley looked at the shelves again. You learned all this from books?" "Some. And the rest?" Mabel glanced toward the page. "My mother taught me before I could understand half of what those books were saying." Wesley had more questions. He asked none of them. Something in Mabel's expression changed when she realized he wasn't going to. Late that night, a sound from the barn woke him. Wesley sat up, reached automatically for the revolver beside the bed, then heard Braveheart give a low, restless snort. He crossed to the window. Rain was falling again. Beneath the barn lantern sat Mabel. She had pulled a stool beside Braveheart's stall and was speaking too softly for Wesley to hear. The horse lowered his head. Slowly, almost sleepily, Braveheart rested it against her shoulder. Mabel stayed there, one hand against his face, asking nothing from him except that he be still. Wesley stood at the window for a long time. His fingers drifted to the sheriff's star pinned to the vest hanging beside the bed. In town, that little piece of metal opened doors, settled arguments, made people listen. Here it seemed to mean almost nothing. He looked again toward the barn. For the first time since Ruth told him Cutter's Creek had taken the bridge, Wesley Marsh found himself thinking something he would not have admitted aloud. He was glad it had. By the 4th inning, the storm had passed. Frost silvered the fence rails before sunrise, and the mountains stood sharp against a pale Wyoming sky. Wesley had already split half a cord of pine when Mabel came from the barn carrying an empty tin cup. "You know," she said, "we didn't take you in for hired labor." "I know." "Then why are you trying to repair everything my mother has complained about since spring?" Wesley set another log on the block. because your mother has an impressive list. From the kitchen window, Ruth called, "The west gate still drags." Mabel closed her eyes. Wesley picked up the axe again. The days found a rhythm. He reset fence posts, patched the barn roof, repaired the west gate, and carried buckets from the well when Mabel needed more water for Braveheart. She never asked him to do something she could easily do herself, and he learned not to offer twice when she said no. Every morning, Wesley carried 2 cups of coffee toward the barn. He kept one. The other appeared on the rail beside Mabel without discussion. The first morning she thanked him. The second, she nodded. By the 5th, she simply reached for it, as though the cup had always belonged there. Braveheart was improving too. The swelling had gone down enough that Mabel allowed him several careful steps outside the stall. Wesley followed too closely. "Sure, you're hovering again." "I'm holding the lead." "You're holding it like you're arresting him." "He has a history of poor decisions." "So does his owner." Wesley looked at her. Mabel hid her smile behind the coffee cup. A few days later, she needed fresh willow bark and several plants that grew along a shaded slope above the ranch. Wesley went with her, carrying a canvas sack. They walked beneath lodgepole pine while the last drops from the storm fell from the branches. Mabel stopped to cut a stem. "Why Braveheart?" Wesley glanced back toward the ranch. "Why not? He jumped sideways yesterday because Ruth dropped a spoon. He was surprised. He nearly climbed into your lap." Wesley smiled despite himself. "I named him when he was young. He frightened easy." "That explains the horse, not the name." He walked several more steps before answering. "Oh, thought a frightened horse ought to have a name reminding him what courage sounded like." Mabel looked at him. Wesley kept his eyes on the trail. "Turns out it was probably meant for me." She could have asked what he meant. She didn't. They walked on. Wesley remembered that silence. Later that afternoon, he found her replacing books on the kitchen shelf. "You worked somewhere before this ranch." Mabel's hand stopped. It wasn't a question. She pulled out a chair and sat. "For 2 years. With the doctor in town?" "Yes." The answer explained more than Wesley expected. Mabel told him without embellishment. The doctor had trusted her hands when he needed assistance. He had trusted her memory, her patience, and her ability to notice changes in a patient. What he had not trusted was her right to contradict him. One case had gone badly after he missed something she had warned him about. When questions came, he let people believe the mistake belonged to her. He never needed to accuse her outright. Silence had done enough. Patience stopped coming. "So you left," Wesley said. "I stopped asking people to believe me." Ruth had emptied a room at the ranch. They scrubbed the floorboards, built shelves, and began treating whoever still came. Mabel touched the spine of one worn book. "It's smaller than what I trained for." She closed it gently. "But it's mine." Wesley felt the old instinct rise in him. Ask for names, establish facts, fix what had been done. Instead, he nodded. Mabel watched him for a moment. Then she returned the book to its shelf. That evening, she asked him a question of her own. "What do you do when you're not working?" Wesley stared into his coffee. "Clean my gun." Mabel waited. "Check the office ledger." Still, she waited. "Sometimes I check it twice." "That sounds thrilling." "It has its moments." "Family?" The humor left quietly. "None nearby." He told her the house where he grew up had burned when he was 19. His family was gone now. He had never rebuilt anything resembling it. "For 6 years, there's been a cot behind the sheriff's office." "You live in your office?" "I sleep there." "That's not quite the same thing." "No," Wesley said. For some reason, he had never noticed the difference until she said it. Mabel reached for the coffee pot and filled his cup. Nothing more. The little rituals continued. Mabel began pouring his second cup at supper before he asked. She learned the sound of his boots crossing the porch. Wesley learned that a lamp burning in the treatment room window after dark meant she was still working. Ruth developed an extraordinary number of reasons to inspect distant corners of the property whenever Wesley and Mabel happened to be alone together. Then one afternoon, a neighboring boy rode into the yard. "Crossing's open." Wesley stopped hammering a loose board. The boy explained that men had braced the temporary crossing at Cutter's Creek. A careful rider could make town now. Mabel stood beside Braveheart's stall. "That's good," she said. "Yes." Neither looked particularly pleased. The next morning, Wesley borrowed the neighbor's gelding and rode into town. Deputy Foss was behind the desk when he entered the sheriff's office. Foss looked up, then smiled. "What?" "Nothing, Sheriff." Wesley hung his wet coat on a peg. Foss returned to the ledger. "Crossing's been usable 2 days." Wesley paused. Braveheart needed watching. Of course. He did. Didn't say he didn't. The smile remained. Wesley collected clean shirts and checked the incident book. Foss had handled everything without difficulty. Before leaving town, Wesley stopped at the mercantile. He bought fresh bandage cloth, a small sack of coffee. Then, after standing before a dusty shelf longer than he cared to admit, an old medical book on livestock and wound care. The clerk wrapped it in brown paper and tied it with string. Wesley tucked the package into his saddlebag. He could have stayed in town that night. His cot was exactly where he had left it. Instead, he turned the borrowed gelding toward Cutter's Creek. The sun was low when Thorn Ranch came into sight. Before Wesley reached the gate, Braveheart raised his head in the corral and gave a loud whinny. The house door opened. Mabel stepped onto the porch. She stopped when she saw him. For one brief second, before she remembered to guard her face, Wesley saw relief there. Then she noticed him seeing it. Neither spoke about it. He dismounted and lifted the coffee, bandages, and brown paper package from the saddlebag. Mabel looked at them. "You went shopping. Official sheriff business. For coffee? Public safety." That small smile returned. Behind her, Ruth sat in a porch chair with sewing in her lap. She looked at Wesley, then at Mabel, then toward the repaired road beyond the gate. The bridge was open now. Wesley Marsh had come back anyway. After that, neither he nor Mabel could pretend the creek was responsible for his presence. The brown paper package remained on the kitchen table until supper. When Mabel finally opened it, she ran her thumb over the faded title of the medical book, then looked across at Wesley. "Oh? You bought this for me? Thought you might find something useful in it. You read it first?" "Only the cover. Remarkable restraint for a sheriff." Ruth hid a smile behind her coffee cup, but another clock had begun ticking. Braveheart was getting better. Each morning Mabel walked him farther. First across the barn aisle, then around the corral, then along the fence where frost-crisp grass bent beneath his hooves. At first, Wesley had asked the same question every day. "How soon?" By the third week, he stopped. Now he asked only, "How is he?" Mabel noticed. She noticed too much where Wesley was concerned. The scrape of his chair across the kitchen floor, the way he knocked mud from his boots before Ruth could complain, the fact that he always left her coffee on the same fence post because that was where the morning sun reached first. One afternoon, Ruth found Mabel standing at the kitchen window, watching Wesley repair a loose hinge that did not particularly need repairing. "That horse will heal eventually." Mabel turned. "I know. And Wesley will have no reason left to stay." "I know that too." Ruth folded a dish towel. Mabel looked back through the glass. "He has a town, Mama, a badge, people depending on him. And I have this ranch." Her voice became firmer. "I won't leave what we built because a man was kind to me for 3 weeks. I won't move into a town that already decided what it wanted to believe about me." "Has Wesley asked you to?" Mabel opened her mouth. Nothing came. Ruth waited. That trouble you? Mabel looked toward the yard. Wesley had finished with the hinge. He tested it once, then glanced toward the kitchen window as though he had felt her watching. Their eyes met through the glass. Mabel stepped back. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's what frightens me." Ruth said nothing more. 2 mornings later, Mabel removed Braveheart's wrap for what she suspected would be the last time. Wesley stood by the stall. She ran her hands carefully down the healed leg, then led Braveheart into the yard. "Walk him!" Wesley did. Again. He turned the horse. No limp. Mabel watched Braveheart place his weight evenly through each stride. "Now bring him back." Wesley stopped before her. Mabel checked the leg once more. "He's ready." Wesley should have smiled. Instead, his eyes traveled beyond the ranch gate toward the mountain road. For weeks, the horse's injury had been an inconvenience, then an excuse. Now it was neither. That evening, the air turned cold and clear. Ruth carried her sewing upstairs unusually early, claiming the lamp was better near her bedroom window. Neither Wesley nor Mabel believed her. They sat on the porch with coffee between them. Braveheart shifted softly inside the barn. Far down in the valley, Cutter's Creek moved over stone. Wesley stared into his cup. "I'm leaving tomorrow." Mabel's fingers stopped against the tin. She did not look at him immediately. "Braveheart's ready?" "You said he was." "He is." Wesley nodded. "Foss has been covering the office. There'll be reports waiting. Winter patrol routes need checking before the first real snow. And I should probably—" "Wesley." He stopped. Mabel set her cup beside the chair. He started again anyway. "I've already stayed longer than I expected. Ruth's got enough wood through November, and I fixed that section of fence by the—" Mabel reached across the space between them. She took his hand. Wesley went silent. It was the first time she had touched him simply because she wanted to. Her fingers rested against his rough palm. For a moment she looked down at their hands. Then she raised her eyes. "Then you should know I love you." The porch seemed to become impossibly still. Even Wesley's breathing changed. Mabel's hand trembled once. She did not pull it away. "I'm not asking you to stay because Braveheart was hurt, Mabel, and I'm not asking because you owe Mama or me anything." She glanced at the silver star on his vest. "I'm not asking the sheriff for anything." Wesley watched her. "Then what are you asking?" "Nothing." That answer struck him harder than any plea could have. Mabel swallowed. "I just couldn't watch you ride through that gate tomorrow without knowing I had told you the truth." Wesley's fingers began to close around hers. "Mabel, Hoofbeats broke through the darkness. Fast. Too fast for anyone traveling casually after sunset. Both turned. A rider appeared beyond the gate, horse lathered from the climb. The man hauled hard on the reins and nearly stumbled when his boots hit the ground. "Miss Thorne!" Mabel was already standing. The rancher came up the path, breathing hard. "My boy's sick. Fever since yesterday. Worse tonight. Is the doctor with him?" "Yes." The man's face tightened. "He doesn't know what's causing it." Mabel released Wesley's hand. "How old is the boy?" 14. "What happened before the fever?" "Nothing that we know of." Mabel was moving before he finished. She entered the house, took her medical bag from beside the treatment room door, and began checking its contents. Ruth appeared at the stairs, already fastening her shawl. Wesley followed Mabel inside. "Who's the doctor?" The rancher named him. Mabel's hands stopped over the clasp of her bag. Wesley knew the name. The room went quiet. It was the same physician who had allowed his own mistake to follow Mabel for 2 years. Ruth looked at her daughter. Mabel closed the bag. Her face revealed almost nothing now. No fear, no anger, only decision. She picked up her coat. Let's go. Wesley reached for his hat. Whatever answer he had been about to give on the porch would have to wait. Outside, 3 horses were being made ready beneath a cold Wyoming sky, and the road ahead led Mabel straight back toward the man whose silence had once cost her nearly everything. The neighboring ranch sat several miles north, beyond a stand of cottonwoods and a narrow cattle trail hardened by the cold. By the time they arrived, lanterns burned in nearly every window. The rancher led them inside. The kitchen smelled of boiled water and coffee left too long on the stove. Wet coats hung from pegs. A worried woman stood beside the bedroom door with both hands knotted in her apron. And beside the bed stood the town doctor. He looked older than Wesley expected. Then he saw Mabel. His expression hardened. "What is she doing here?" the boy's father answered. "I brought her." Mabel removed her coat. 2 years earlier, she had entered rooms like this carrying the doctor's instruments. Tonight, she carried her own bag. Ruth stood beside her. Wesley stayed behind them, like Mabel approached the bed. The boy's face was flushed. His breathing came shallow and tired. "How long has the fever been this high?" The doctor answered before the mother could. "Since afternoon. I've already examined him." Mabel looked at the mother instead. "When did he first feel poorly?" "Yesterday morning." "Chills?" "Yes." "Eating?" "Hardly anything." Mabel asked several more questions, then stopped. The boy had shifted beneath the blanket. His right leg barely moved. Mabel noticed. "Does that hurt?" The boy looked toward his mother. "No, ma'am." Mabel waited, not accusing, just waiting. Finally, his eyes dropped. "I fell." His mother leaned forward. "When?" 2 days ago." "Where?" "Up by the ledge." The mother closed her eyes. She had seen one scrape near his knee. He had insisted it was nothing. The doctor pulled back the blanket and examined the leg again. "Superficial." Mabel crouched. "May I?" The mother nodded. Mabel checked slowly from the knee downward, then stopped above the calf where the edge of the boy's stocking had hidden a second injury. Small, easy to overlook, but the skin around it was hot and swollen. Mabel looked at Ruth. Ruth understood immediately. "There," Mabel said. The doctor bent closer. His silence told Wesley enough. Mabel opened her bag. "We need to clean this properly." The doctor straightened. "I am still the physician here." Mabel looked up. "I didn't say you weren't. You have no recognized medical standing. You cannot simply enter a sick room and interfere with a physician's diagnosis." Wesley's jaw tightened. He remembered what Mabel had told him. The missed warning, the blame, 2 years of silence. His hand moved almost without thought toward the star on his vest. Mabel saw it. "Wesley." Only his name. His hand stopped. Their eyes met. Then Mabel turned away from him and faced the boy's mother. "Let the family choose," the doctor protested. Mabel did not answer him. Neither did Wesley. The mother looked at the physician who had been there for hours, then at Mabel. Finally, she stepped away from the bedside. "Help him." Mabel nodded once. Wesley backed toward the door. Every instinct he had told him to remain. Instead, he left. Outside, he watered the horses. He carried split wood into the kitchen when Ruth asked for it. He filled kettles from the pump and kept 2 anxious neighbors from crowding into the house. Then he waited. Midnight passed. The temperature fell. Frost formed along the hitching rail. Once Wesley saw Mabel through the bedroom window, sleeves rolled above her wrists, bending over the boy while Ruth worked beside her. He did not go inside. Near dawn, the house became strangely quiet. Wesley stood from the porch step. The door opened. Ruth appeared. She looked exhausted. Then she nodded. Only once. Wesley let out the breath he had been holding. Inside, the boy was sleeping. His mother sat beside him with one hand over her mouth. Mabel lowered herself into a kitchen chair. For the first time all night, her hands shook. The doctor stood across the room. He looked at Mabel. "You found what I missed." Nobody answered. His eyes dropped. "That much I was wrong about." Mabel waited. There was another admission he could have made. Everyone who knew the old story could feel its absence. It never came. The doctor collected his coat and left. On the ride back to Thorn Ranch, dawn spread thin and pale across the foothills. For nearly a mile, nobody spoke. Then Mabel said, "He admitted last night." Wesley knew exactly what she meant. Not 2 years ago. No. Another stretch of hoofbeats. He didn't. That evening, after Ruth had gone inside, Mabel found Wesley near the barn. "You reached for your badge." Wesley did not pretend otherwise. "I did." "Why?" "I wanted to protect you." Mabel looked toward the corral. "I spent 2 years living with what happened because men decided what I was allowed to say in a sick room." Wesley remained still. "I don't need a good sheriff doing a gentler version of the same thing." The words landed. "I wasn't trying to control you." "I know." That surprised him. Mabel finally looked at him. "But from where I was standing, those two things can look very much alike." Wesley thought about his hand moving toward the star before he'd even decided what to do. "I thought protection and control were different." "They are." A pause. "Just not always from where I'm standing." Wesley nodded slowly. "Then I'll learn the difference." He did not reach for her. He did not ask whether she forgave him. Later, Mabel entered the kitchen and poured herself coffee. Wesley sat at the table repairing a leather strap. She looked at him, then reached for a second cup. She filled it and placed it beside his hand. Wesley looked at the coffee, then at her. Mabel returned to her chair. Nothing else was said. 3 mornings later, someone knocked. Ruth opened the door. A woman stood on the porch holding a coughing child against her shoulder. "I heard about Aaron's boy." Mabel had been sorting dried herbs at the table. She went still. The woman shifted nervously. "They said Miss Thorne might look at her." Mabel glanced at Ruth, then opened the door wider. "Come in." 2 days later, a ranch hand came with a swollen wrist. After him came an older woman whose cough had lingered since the first frost. No announcement had been printed. No doctor had sent them. They simply came. 1 name became 3 in Ruth's ledger, then 5. That afternoon, Wesley found Mabel in the barn with Braveheart. She led the horse across the aisle. Once, twice, then into the yard. Braveheart walked evenly. Mabel turned him and watched every step back. No hesitation, no limp, nothing left to treat. She rested her hand against his neck. Across the yard, Wesley understood before she said anything. Braveheart was completely healed. The creek was open, the horse was ready, and tomorrow had finally arrived. Morning came clear, no rain, no broken bridge, no frightened rider pounding at the gate with an emergency. Nothing remained to keep Wesley Marsh at Thorn Ranch except what he wanted. He packed before breakfast. A clean shirt, shaving kit, spare cartridges. The few things he had accumulated during 3 weeks beneath Ruth Thorne's roof. He rolled everything behind Braveheart's saddle while the gelding stood quietly in the cold morning light. Mabel came from the barn. She checked Braveheart one final time. Her hands moved down the healed leg, paused over the place that had once been swollen, then withdrew. "He's sound." Wesley nodded. Ruth brought a cloth bundle from the house. Biscuits, salt pork, 2 apples. "Town isn't that far. And you'll have leftovers." He accepted the bundle. Mabel stood beside the gate. She did not tell him she loved him again. She had already done the harder thing. Now she gave him something harder still. The freedom to leave. Wesley mounted. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then he touched 2 fingers to his hat. "Ruth." "Sheriff." His eyes settled on Mabel. Mabel. She managed a small smile. Take care of Braveheart. Wesley looked down at the horse. I expect he'd rather hear that from you. Then he turned toward the road. Mabel remained at the gate until the hoofbeats disappeared into the hills. Only then did her shoulders lower. Ruth came beside her. She did not say he would return. She didn't know. After a while, Mabel walked into the barn. On the rail beside Braveheart's empty stall was the place where Wesley had left her coffee every morning. It had never looked empty before. Up in the mountains, Wesley reached the bend where Braveheart had fallen. He stopped. Ahead lay Cutter's Creek. Beyond it, town, his desk, Foss, reports, patrols. Men who expected the sheriff to know what came next. Behind him lay Thorn Ranch. For 6 years, Wesley had believed being needed was the closest thing a man like him had to belonging. But Mabel had never needed him to rescue her. She had built her life before he arrived. She had loved him without asking him to surrender anything. Wesley looked down at Braveheart. Well? The horse flicked an ear. Wesley turned him around. Mabel heard the hoofbeats perhaps 20 minutes later. She was sorting jars in the treatment room and refused to move at first. Another patient, she told herself. Then Braveheart whinnied. Mabel crossed the yard. Wesley rode through the gate with his saddlebags still tied behind him. He dismounted. Mabel stared at him. Forget something, Sheriff? Wesley reached for the silver star on his vest. He unpinned it. Mabel's expression changed. He did not throw it away. He simply held it in his palm. You said you weren't asking the sheriff to stay. I wasn't. So don't. He lowered his hand. Ask the man. Mabel said nothing. The sheriff still has to go back to town, Wesley continued. Foss is good, but the badge is mine. There are people depending on me. He glanced toward the little house, the barn, the mountains beyond them. But Wesley Marsh doesn't have to spend every night sleeping on a cot behind his office. Mabel's eyes shone. I've spent half my life thinking home was wherever duty sent me. He looked at her. Turns out home is where I want to come back when the duty's done. This time he finished the answer the frightened rider had interrupted. I love you, Mabel. She took his hand. Wesley closed his fingers around hers. He did not ask her to leave the ranch. He did not ask her to give up her patience. He asked for the chance to court her. Properly. By autumn, Foss had become accustomed to seeing Wesley ride out after Saturday patrol and return Monday morning with mud on Braveheart's legs and Ruth's biscuits in his saddlebag. Sunday dinners became routine. So did coffee by the barn. Mabel's patient ledger filled slowly, then steadily. Late that autumn, Wesley brought a small ring to the barn. Braveheart stood nearby, chewing hay. Wesley had faced armed men with steadier hands. Mabel Thorne would— Yes, he blinked. I haven't finished. You took long enough getting started. Her laughter filled the barn. Wesley kissed her. By winter, an unused section of the barn was becoming a proper treatment room. Mabel and Ruth decided what it needed. Wesley built what they asked for: shelves, a work table, a cabinet with a good latch, hooks for lanterns and winter coats. Ruth kept the ledger. Mabel treated the patients. Wesley carried lumber. It suited them. Then, one spring morning, Ruth found a package beside the gate. No note. Inside was an old book on wound care. Mabel opened the cover. She recognized the town doctor's handwriting. There was still no apology. Mabel turned several pages. Ruth watched her. What will you do with it? Mabel placed the book on the shelf beside her mother's. Keep what's useful. Then she went back to the patient waiting outside. Wesley and Mabel married that spring in the small-town church. Ruth sat in the front row. Foss stood awkwardly in his best coat. Braveheart waited outside the fence, perfectly sound. Months later, Wesley returned from patrol and found Mabel beside the barn. Braveheart walked toward her without the slightest trace of a limp. Mabel looked down at his leg. He take another bad step? No. Wesley dismounted. Thought I'd walk him a while anyway, just to make sure. Mabel looked at him. Then she laughed and kissed him softly. On the porch, Ruth suddenly became deeply interested in sorting a jar of herbs she had already sorted that morning. Beyond her stretched the high Wyoming grass. There was smoke from the chimney, horses at the fence, names filling the treatment ledger, and a sheriff's saddle resting beside the barn door. Wesley Marsh had spent years learning to read trails left by other men. In the end, the worst step Braveheart ever took showed him the one road Wesley had never learned to recognize. The road home. And maybe that is why his story stays with us. Imagine yourself at that mountain bend, with a clear road ahead, and someone you love somewhere behind you. No storm forcing your choice. No injured horse giving you an excuse. Just the frightening freedom to decide what matters enough to turn around for. Mabel never asked Wesley to rescue her. She had already survived disappointment, rebuilt her work, and learned to stand on her own judgment. And Wesley didn't need to surrender his duty to love her. He simply had to understand that being needed and being loved were not the same thing. Sometimes a second chance doesn't arrive with thunder. Sometimes it is a cup of coffee left on a barn rail, a hand reaching for yours on a quiet porch, an apology shown through changed behavior, or a familiar set of hoofbeats coming back up the road when you had prepared yourself to never hear them again. Maybe home isn't always the place where our story began. Maybe it's the place we freely choose to return to. If you've ever had someone, or somewhere, that made you understand what home really means, tell me about it in the comments. And if you'd like to stay for more stories of frontier love, second chances, mystery, and healing, you're warmly invited to subscribe. There are many more trails ahead of us. Until the next one, take care of yourself and of the people worth riding home to.